business research, we do not live in the well of theory alone, but we try to move into how the theories can affect the real workings of businesses. Then we try to understand what research means. So based on what we did last week, what is research? What do you understand by research? Yes. Okay. Of what? Of investigating. It means to carry out. So to solve what? Practical problem. So we talked about the fact that business research has to be systematic. Systematic in terms of problem definition, systematic in terms of data collection, systematic in terms of data analysis, systematic in terms of interpretation of data, systematic in terms of dissemination of research results. Okay? So at every stage, we have to follow some standard protocols, and that's why we say it is systematic. There are some standard protocols that you must follow if you want to identify a research problem. There are some systematic process you need to follow if you want to collect data, and so on and so forth. Then, in the end, we looked at different types of research. And we said that we can have one research that is so strong in theory and methodology, but weak in what? Practice. You can have another level of research that is strong in both theory and method, and then also strong in terms of what? Practice. You can have research that is weak in theory and also weak in practice. So we looked at all that. Now, the next thing we want to do before we move to philosophy is to look at briefly the research process. The research process. First, in the next topic, we'll look at the research process in 3 stages. But this is a final breakdown of what the research process entails. The first step is to formulate and clarify your topic or problem. Formulate, and then what? You clarify your problem. In research, the starting point is to define a topic or your problem. What do you want to investigate? So the topic has to be clear. So one of the things that you do with your supervisor is to ensure that the research topic you want to use for your term paper or dissertation is clear. Okay? So later on, we'll talk about what are the characteristics of a research topic. Then the next step is literature review. You may not be the first to deal with the issue. There may be a lot of other authors in the past who have researched on the issue, either in terms of the theory or in terms of the practice. So as a researcher, one of the things you need to do is to find out what is known about the topic. So to find out what is known, you have to search what? The literature. So you find out what is known, and then what is not known, which must be known, and that's what you are now doing. Okay? So upon looking at the literature, finding out what is known, you then determine what is not known. That is the gap that you are feeling as a researcher. So it is then not proper for you to review literature, and then when you are now going to conduct your own work, you are doing the same thing that the previous literature you have reviewed, they have done. It means that there's no addition to knowledge. Yes, please. Yes, we have. We have. Will you? Yes, you need a literature. At least there will be what we call related literature. Okay, related literature. But they have not done exactly what you have done, but you can draw lessons from what they did. And they can actually provide a guide into what you want to do. So we have a lot of that pertaining. When you go through the literature very well, you'll find that in the topic that you are interested in, there may be a lot of gray areas or areas that nobody has ventured into, and that is where you will come in. Then you have to design the literature. So here we are at the realm of methodology, research methodology. You have to design the research. So designing the research will involve determining the sample size. How many people do I need to interview for the research to be what? Valid. That's number one. Number two, how do I select them? Okay. So after identifying the sample size, you have to now determine how do I select them? Okay. Do I select them using simple random sampling? Do I select them using haphazard sampling? Do I select them using systematic sampling? Do I select them using snowballing? Or do I select them purposively? So you have to make a critical decision. So after selecting them, how do I collect the data from them? Do I conduct interviews? Do I do an electronic questionnaire where I send it to their WhatsApp pages? Or do I send them emails? Or do I meet them at their workplace or at their homes? And then I give them questionnaire. The questionnaire, am I the one who will fill the questionnaire for them? Or they will fill the questionnaire on their own? You have to make all those critical decisions based on the research process protocol. Then after you have collected the data, you now have to determine how you analyze the data. Okay? What are the appropriate tools that can help me to analyze the data well? Okay? Then after I have analyzed the data, I then have to write everything, put the research report together from the start to the finish so that the research will have a logical flow. Okay? So there must be what we call a common thread that flows from the top right up to the down so that there is no disconnect. If at any point in time there is a disconnect in any of the joints, that is where your research will have a problem. So each stage is very critical, and we should work as researchers to ensure that everything is done well. Yes. Yes, so after conducting the literature review, there are certain cases that you have, if you've started with a topic, you started with the topic first before doing your review. Then you realize that what you were doing, somebody has done it already. If you have nothing to add to what they have done, you are better off abandoning it, changing course. Okay? But if you feel that what they have done there is something small I can add to it. Or sometimes it's just maybe just adding a new variable or using a new theory or using a new method just to bring something new in the research work. Then you can create some gap there. But if you see that if you go this way, somebody has done it. You go this way, somebody has done it. You go that way, somebody has done it. Then the door is closed. If you then go ahead to conduct the research, people will say that you are just duplicating knowledge. What already exists is what you are bringing out. So there's nothing new. So one of the things that questions that you will be confronted with after you have presented your dissertation will be, and you should always be prepared to answer that. What is new about your work? Yes. 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 So for instance, it's asking that I said there should not be a disconnect among the stages of the research process, which we discussed previously. So what do I mean by that? You can find that, and we see that a lot. The research objectives are different from the findings. In other words, you said that you are going to analyze determinants of customer satisfaction. And then at the end of the day, when I go to your research findings, you are talking about factors that lead to, say, worker motivation. There's a disconnect, a complete disconnect. So it's like along the line you were sleeping, and then like you are driving there, and you veer off the road, and you never come back to the road itself. And then you go, and then in conclusion, you have concluded on the wrong premise. So you see that we see that very common, that you have set out your research objectives, but you go and collect data. And when we look at the data you have collected, the variables that are described in your research objective, you didn't collect data on them. So how are you going to analyze your data in a way that will cause you to fulfill your research objectives? So in that case, there will be a disconnect. So there can be a disconnect between your topic, research objectives, research problem, and even methodology. So we have encountered situation where a student will put the research topic there. But if you look at the research questions, none of them will address the research topic. So you see that they are going in opposite directions. So what we are saying is that if your research topic then defines what objectives you can research on. So when you are crafting your research objectives, always have in mind the research topic. Each objective must lead to achieving the overall topic that you are dealing with, and so on and so forth. Now, what factors are important when it comes to research? Number one, the impact of your personal feelings and beliefs. Okay? As a researcher, your personal feelings and beliefs are important when it comes to what research topics that you will research in and what topics that you will not research in. There are some research topics that I will not find very interesting, okay, due to my beliefs and due to my values. So I will not venture into those topics, no matter what. I will never conduct research on those areas, okay? So you must know your personal beliefs, your personal values, as a researcher. Then access to data. When you come out with your topic, one of the critical questions you must ask yourself is data on the topic available? If it is available, is it accessible? Because there's one thing, it's one thing for the data to be available. It's available at the institutional level. It's available on the website, but can you have access to it? Most of the time, they will say that you have to pay dollars. Do you have the dollars to get the data and use it? Number two, if the data does not already exist, can you collect the data? Do you have the resources to collect the data for your research? So you must answer that. Access to data. So for instance, I had one of my MPhil students, he wants to do a research work on crowdfunding. So one of the questions I asked him is, do you have the data? Then he said he will check. So he went and checked, and the data that he got, I think the data will cost somewhere around $350. So he came to me that, no, the way it is, even though the data is available, but it is not accessible financially. His pocket cannot what? Afford that. Okay. So I'm still battling with him to change the topic. I'm encouraging him to look for the money so that we can get the data, because this is a very valuable data that if we get, we can do a lot with it. Okay? But he's also telling me that. Yes. Yes, some of the data, especially most of the data that are very critical, they are for sale. Yes, they are for sale. Unless you use open source data. If it is data at the Ghana Statistical Service, or say the Bank of Ghana, or whatever, those ones, they are free. You go and download. But if you want, you've never, I see. That's one of the challenges that researchers face, especially in developing countries. In the advanced countries, the universities subscribe to those paid data so that staff and students can use it. And let me tell you that if you have not attended that university and you publish a work with their data, and they know that you didn't buy the data from them, they will sue you. Yes. So it's not a small matter. That's also their business. No. They have already obtained ethical clearance and are selling the data. Okay. So if you want high-level data that you actually need for your project, which is already available, a lot of them, they are not open source. You have to pay. Why? No, some students are rich. Yeah, they are rich. Okay, madam. Oh. They can buy. Okay. So as much as possible, you then find that most of us scholars in developing countries, we end up using open source data. And that does not advance knowledge that much, because really the data that is so valuable that I need as an academic, I can't have access to it. I go to the internet, I search, and then I'm confronted with the dollar value of the data. So I have to retreat and then come and use data that is available. Okay? So you see that a lot of the data we use, most of them are outdated. So, for instance, most people use Ghana Statistical Service data, the Ghana Living Standard Survey, which is done every 5 years. So if they do it this year, then you are waiting for the next 5 years before you can get up-to-date data. But those institutions that we are talking about, you can have real-time data as things are happening. They can give you access to real-time data for you to use for your analysis. Okay, so those are some of the challenges that we are facing. Then time and other resources. When you are going to do a research, look at the time that you have at hand. Remember, so for instance, this course, if you are doing MBA, you have a maximum of 2 years. If you are doing MSc, a maximum of 1 year. So don't go and pick a topic that will take 3 years to complete. For PhD, that's what we require of them. Take a topic that will take 3 years to complete. Okay, 3 years minimum, 4 years. US is 5 years actually. Okay, so look at the time and the resources. Okay, so if you don't have money, don't go and pick a topic that will require dollars before you can download the data. Otherwise, you'll be frustrated. Okay, so that has to be. And then also look at money when you are determining the sample size. Okay, then validity and reliability of the data. Various data have different degrees of reliability. They usually data that is from official sources. So Ghana Statistical Service, Bank of Ghana, World Bank, IMF are regarded generally to be of high validity and reliability. Usually data that is collected by the researcher themselves is usually regarded to be of low quality. Okay? Because there is the general belief that as an individual, you don't have the resources and the competence to ensure that the data you take into consideration all quality control mechanisms to be able to produce quality data compared to an institution like the Ghana Statistical Service. They can afford to hire research assistants and pay them handsomely. And sometimes they will even give the respondents some small money. But you as a researcher, you don't have that money. So because of that, own collected data in some journals, you can't publish there. Because they cannot tell whether you sat under some mango tree somewhere and, and then you completed the questionnaire yourself, or you actually went to the field to interview the people. Okay, and these days we are seeing an increasing trend of that. Researchers who have hired field officers have complained that they've had reports that the field officers sit under trees, sometimes even in their bedrooms, and then they fill questionnaires for respondents, and then they come and submit it. So you take that data, analyze it, and try to use it to what? Formulate policy. Why would the policy not fail? Because the data does not reflect what is on the ground. Okay? So the quality of the data is important. Then ethical issues. One of the topics we'll treat is research ethics. You have to ensure that as a researcher, you respect the privacy of your respondents. Okay, so you usually say that when you enter a house to administer a questionnaire, your boundary is within the compound, not inside the bedroom of what? The respondent. That's all. Once you enter the compound, you sit outside, interview, and go. So respect the privacy of the respondents. Also, informed consent. Let them voluntarily agree to participate in the study. It should not be compulsory for everybody. If you go to a respondent, you first ask them whether they are feeling willing and able to participate so that you don't violate their privacy. Okay.
If you have, let's say, a regional commander, security service.
Yes.
Let's say they will go to them. Maybe they have some rapport. And then you direct them down, come to the district level, you collect it. And at that point, you as a district commander, you are bound. So the students follow you. You have not established any rapport with the researcher. It's one of the ethical issues.
Yes, it's a serious ethical issue. Because in the sense that you have your personal decision to make. Okay? You have your personal freedoms, freedom to participate and freedom not to participate. So it can be that at that particular point in time, you are facing some serious crisis in your life. If you don't take time, if you are answering the questionnaire, all those frustrations will reflect in the way you answer the questions. And in the end, the research will not achieve its purpose. So we say that allow people to freely decide whether they want to participate or not. Otherwise, you end up collecting biased data. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes.
About technically. For instance, like you ask somebody piece of a daily income or monthly income. And there's a perception that you are trying to gather this data in order to inform government tax debt. So they might set on maybe some very valid information that you need. And that might probably affect the policy formulation as a result of the outcome of this your research. Is this something that is possible?
Yeah, so what we'll do, what we talk about here is measurement error. Okay, so you are dealing with a situation where people generally are not comfortable disclosing their incomes. So generally what we then do is that we tackle the measurement of income from the perspective of expenditure. Okay, because technically we assume that income is equal to what? Expenditure for a rational being. Your income should be equal to your expenditure. People are more comfortable talking about their expenditure than their income. Okay? So what you do is that you ask them what they spend. And it is shown that when you ask people to indicate what they spend, the total is usually greater than when you ask them how much they earn, because they will understate their earnings. Okay, but for expenses, they are less likely to, understate them. So that's usually the approach that we use. So this calls into question how the questions are crafted. So we have questionnaire design. There are also technical issues there. How to design the questionnaire so that you will collect the data that you actually intend to collect. Okay. People may try to hide their earnings or hide information. So it is your duty as a researcher to foresee that and then put in place mechanisms that can cause people as much as possible to trust the process and then volunteer information that you need. Yes. Yeah.
They become very alarmed when they see you putting the pen in the paper.
Yes.
But you made mention the other slide in the data collection.
Yes.
I so in this case, might really affect this kind of data that we are likely because of that kind of process. That is one. The other aspect has to do with is it possible to process a person just have an interaction, doing very well you are give some information, then later on you give them near them because of that kind of process.
Now, so as a researcher, your entry process is important. So we talk about community entry. Okay, how you enter, how the people see you. Yeah, okay. When I'm done, how you approach them, how you even dress is very important when you go to a rural community to collect data. So your community entry must be right, so that you let the people make you feel that you are part of them. Okay, so you earn their trust in your community entry. Make sure that all the protocols that are required when somebody visits the community are fulfilled. Okay, so when you have done that, it will minimize some of these situations. Now, the second part you talked about works when you are doing what we call participant observation. Participant observation. Or you can also do general observation. Apart from having a formal questionnaire where you sit down and then also ask them questions and they answer and you feel, you can also just go and participate in whatever they are doing, and then you collect your data. Of course, there are ethical issues there as well, but nonetheless, it's an approach that you can employ. Yes.
With regards to taking of data,
Yes.
we had an instance, we were supposed to take data on family plan within the following metropolis. We went to the Chilpoiri community, one, and some communities. It was difficult for us to get email to answer our questions. Even though we formally wrote even to the chief palace, telling them that maybe officers will be coming to take the document. So we were not coming. Then later we realized that their husbands stopped them from coming to give us those valuable information because they are in family. So with that, finally, people had to just follow the questionnaire because we looked like we were not getting, we were not able to meet our target.
Yes.
Even some of the women, when their husbands went for prayers, that some missed even they were not able to answer the question. And they gave us their reasons. So something like this.
You see, some of the topics are sensitive. Okay? When you are dealing with sensitive topics, even me, if you come to me to collect data on family plan, I will not answer. I don't like that topic. You understand that? So there are there are, and that's why we said that beliefs and values, they affect research. The beliefs and values. There are some of the topics, they work well in advanced countries. Family planning is an issue in US. It's an issue in Europe, but not in Africa.
But yes, it's a topic.
That's what I'm saying. Some people are sponsoring those things. You understand that? Some people are sponsoring things that we have not really embraced. So there will be resistance. Okay, so it will take time. And you see that's why, and when we come to the philosophies, you will understand some of this. That's the society is becoming more liberal and more liberal and more liberal. It will come to a time that the man cannot stop the wife from coming out to answer questions. And that's where the society is moving towards. Okay, that is what is happening in the advanced countries. You can't even cane your child. Okay, you can't cane your child. You understand that? So you see that it's those same things that they are bringing here. And with time, will also be like that. So it will be less easy for you to conduct that research. But until then, what I'm saying, it means that the people don't need it. They don't need it. That's it. They don't need it.
No promotion. We are trying to.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. There are sponsors driving some set of agenda. There's pushing some sort of agenda, which is alien to us. So definitely there's going to be resistance. It will take time. Those ones, you can't change them overnight. It will take time. Yes. Okay.
Or the real situation, that would inform the respondent. I get it. When about okay, right, I want to progress the policy. You're not getting this time if there is a you know these particular areas are always
yes, again, I've not taken break time to even analyze. So what do I do?
That's what I'm saying. You see, let's just look at, I'm coming. Yeah. You see, there are sensitive topics. Whether there are some topics, whether you enter well or not, you are going to have problems. Okay? Okay, let me hear you. Let me hear you.
And community entry beginning was right. And that's the formality. But sometimes when you get to the community, you also use your head. Who is the decision maker in the community? That's the chief. They are champions, community champions, before the community champions. When they talk, things happen. When you meet them, that's what they're saying. Now, when you come to a household, there's somebody who talks, who speaks, and things happen. Who's that person? That's the man. The champion cannot go directing the man to a. So first, we should have had sensitization meeting with the men. First, telling them the importance of the business. So it is for family planning. It's not for the women to do family planning, but to understand how they give them and how support can come here for you. And I think with this, they will inform their wives to come to you. But if you don't meet them first and you want to meet the wife directly, trust me,
Okay, let's make progress. Let's make progress. All right, so these are review questions on this first part. So you should be able to answer them very easy. 4 distinctive features of business research. Okay. 4 debates in terms of management research, distinguishing between basic and applied research. We've done them. So just go through and revise. Now, the second part, philosophy. Okay. Philosophy. Now, every researcher comes to the research table wearing a lens. Okay, so there is, as I approach any research topic, I am wearing a particular lens. The lens that you are wearing will determine what you see. Okay, so if you are wearing dark glasses, if you forget that you are wearing dark glasses, you may think that it's about to rain or it is evening. Okay, but if you are wearing sharp medicated lenses, you will see very clearly. If it is afternoon, you know it's afternoon. If it is morning, you know it's morning. If it is evening, you know it's evening. That is how divergences in research are. We see differently, and for that matter, that influences the approaches that we use. And that's why you will find people who say that they are qualitative researchers. It's because of the lens they are wearing. Some will say they are quantitative. To depend on the lens, how they see things. Some will say they are mixed method researchers. Depends on what the lens that they are wearing. So the next discussion, which is philosophies, talks about the lens that a researcher wears when they come to the research table. Okay? When we are talking about research philosophy, there are some key terminologies. We call them the philosophical assumptions. Okay? So we have philosophical assumptions, and then we have the philosophical perspectives. Okay? The philosophical assumptions are ontology, epistemology, methodology, and then we have axiology. Okay? So every one of you, by the end of the lecture, you must determine your ontology. You must determine your epistemology, your axiology, as well as your methodology. Okay, so go through all of them one after the other to understand what they are. Then, having defined your methodology, epistemology, ontology, axiology, and all that, that will determine where you stand when it comes to research philosophy. And we have, in terms of major categorization, at least 4 main perspectives. We have positivism, we have realism, and then we have interpretivism, or what others call constructivism, and then we have pragmatism. So when you go through the philosophical assumptions, you must determine where you stand. Okay? So from the onset, I have to declare where I stand. I am a positivist. okay, so that you know where I stand. Okay? I'm a positivist, and I will show you who a positivist is. Okay? So that at the end of this lesson, you should be able to tell your philosophical lens, your philosophical school or assumption, and then be able to distinguish between deductive and then inductive research. Okay? Deductive and inductive research will flow from the philosophical assumptions. Now we have what we call the research onion. Okay, so it's like your natural onion that you use to, cook your stew and soup and all that. Research is also like that. It's made up of layers. You peel off the first layer, you think you are done, then another layer is there. You peel it off, another layer is there. So you move from one layer to the other. The first layer of research concerns the philosophies. The philosophies, which are positivism, realism, interpretivism, and then pragmatism. So first, when you approach any research, determine what research lens that you are wearing. Are you a positivist? Are you an interpretivist? Are you a realist? Or are you a critical management researcher? So that one, I have not added that to this, but that's another new philosophy. But we are not adding it to this particular discussion. Or you are a pragmatist. So your research philosophy is the beginning of your research journey. Okay? Then when you peel off the research philosophy layer, the next layer is approach, research approaches. You determine whether you are inductive or what? Deductive. You determine whether you as a researcher, you start by formulating hypotheses based on theory, then you move from the hypothesis and theory to collecting the data, then you use the data to test the theory, and after testing the theory, you now make decision. In that case, we say that you are deductive. Or are you the type of researcher who will begin with the data collection? You collect the data, then based on the data, you derive patterns, and based on those patterns, you produce theories. In that case, we say that you are practicing what we call inductive research. Inductive research. Now, after the approaches, you move to strategies. Okay? After the strategies, there are many. Whether you want to conduct an experiment, so the scientists, the physicists, the chemists, they will have a laboratory that they can conduct an experiment. Or whether you want to use a case study as a social scientist, you can pick one organization and then ask questions in that organization. So that becomes a case study. Or it can be one individual. You can have a single case study or multiple case studies. Or you want to do survey where you distribute questionnaires around and collect data. Or you want to do action research where the research is intended to cause a change in behavior or attitudes of the people. Or you want to develop theory, in which case you use what we call grounded theory. Or you want to do ethnography, where, as I discussed last week, if I want to do a research on the Gambaga witch camp, so I have to go and stay with the alleged witches, okay, for a number of weeks or a number of months. And then as I'm there, I'm collecting my data. So in that case, with ethnography. Okay, ethnography is called ethnography. Or I just need archival data. So you can go to museum and monuments, or go to the library board, and then you look at very old documents, very old newspapers. Somebody may want to know how were news stories reported before independence. It means you have to go back to the archives and collect newspapers before 1957. You can do research on that as well. So we call that archival research. So that is at the level of strategies. Then after determining the strategies, you have choices to make in terms of methodology. Whether you want to do quantitative, qualitative, mixed method, or whether you want to do multi-method or mono method. Mono method means you are using single method. A multi-method means you are using what? A collection of what? Different methods together. And whether the next is the time horizon. Is your research having one time horizon, or it's having multiple time horizons? If it is having multiple time horizons, will the time horizon also cut across different people? So in that case, we call it longitudinal data. Then we have data that only takes into consideration one point in time. So say only 2020. In which case, if you are collecting the data from different people, we call that cross-sectional data. Okay, so you must know the difference between, number one, cross-sectional data, time series data, and then longitudinal or panel data. Time series data will mean that you are collecting data on the same person over what? Several years, or the same country over several years. So we call that time series data. If you are now collecting data on different categories of people, but at one point in time, we call that cross-sectional data. If you are collecting data on different people across different time periods, then we call that what? Longitudinal or panel data. Therefore, longitudinal data is a combination of what? Cross-sectional data and then time series data. Then the last piece of the onion is embedded techniques and procedures. So you now have to define your techniques and procedures for collecting data. How will the people be sampled? How many people will be sampled? What instruments do you use for the data collection? Are you using interviews, focus group discussion, self-administered questionnaire, or what are the means of data collection? Are you doing video recording, audio recording, whatever? All those things then come to the inner core of the research only. So that done, we can then move into the philosophies proper. So when we talk about the philosophy of management research, we are talking about how we develop knowledge and what is the nature of that knowledge. So if it is accounting, how does knowledge in accounting come about? What constitutes knowledge in accounting? Okay, can we just call anything knowledge in accounting, or it must be of a certain caliber before we can regard it as knowledge? So that is what philosophy is about. So it goes to the foundation of knowledge, the foundation of understanding, the foundation of thinking. the foundation of knowledge generation. That is what we call the philosophy of research. The philosophy of research. So as a researcher, your philosophy must be clear. There are three major philosophical assumptions, but people usually add methodology. So we add an axiology to methodology. So methodology then adds, and then we have four philosophical assumptions. First is your ontology. Ontology will talk about the nature of reality. Okay? The nature of reality. I'll come to that in detail. Then your epistemology. Epistemology has to do with what constitutes valid knowledge. Okay? What constitutes valid knowledge. Axiology has to do with the role of values in research. That's axiology. Okay? But we'll take each one of them and discuss them in detail so that at the end of the day, you should be able to determine where you belong when it comes to ontology. Ontology, as I did mention, has to do with the nature of reality. People have different opinions when it comes to reality. One of the issues about reality has to do with the existence of God. If you ask the question, does God exist? In Africa, it's not a problem. Okay? It's going to be that almost 98% will say that it's yes. But when you go to Europe or US and you ask that question, does God exist? You find that you can even have up to 50% who will say no, that God doesn't exist. The answer to that question reveals people's perception of the nature of reality. So is God real or not? Or it is something that your mind has been tuned to perceive? Let me issue a disclaimer. I believe that God exists. Before you say that, I believe that God exists. Okay? Okay? So when you believe that God exists, it means that you have in your mind some mental picture about the being called God. The other person who will say that God does not exist does not have any picture about the entity or the being that we will call God. So for that matter, they will say that God what? Does not what? Exist. And it is said in the scriptures that it is only a fool who says that God does not what? Exist. Now, the nature of reality has continuously changed over time. Okay? So, for instance, we have grown to know that when you are born, you are either born what? A man or what? A woman. And in some few situations we have what? Hermaphrodite. Okay? But we are now living in a world where it is said that it is possible that when they give birth to you and you are a man, you can cross over and then become what? A woman. And then when they give birth to you, you can also cross the other side. So in that case, you will say that gender or sex is determined at what? At birth. But their school of thought is that gender is fluid. In other words, it's not a binary construct. It is fluid. In other words, you can flow here and you can flow there. Okay? So their nature of reality is then that the issue of sex is non-binary. Okay, so it's not a matter of if you are born a man, you are a man forever, or if you are born a woman, you are a woman forever. But you can make a decision and cross. So that is at the core of ontology. The question is, does reality exist or not? Or it exists just within the mind? Okay? Or it is the human being who decides what is reality. Okay? So that is at the heart of what? Ontology. The other aspect of ontology that we usually give as an example relates to truth. What is truth? You can have up to 3 people giving different sides of a story, and all of them are saying that they are telling the truth. What it means is that these 3 people have different realities. So it means that they are saying that we have what we call multiple reality. And that's why the world is now crooked. Because they will say that we don't have one thing called truth. That we have your truth, we have my truth, and the real truth is also somewhere. So in the end, that there's no truth. But we all know that, and I bet you, if I ask you about the color of this wall, we are going to struggle. What color is it painted? We are going to see different things and different descriptions. What you see, what you perceive, is your nature of reality, and that is what we call ontology as a researcher. Do you believe that reality is objective or reality is socially constructed? Okay, if you believe that reality is objective, then you are akin to somebody who will say that you are born either a man or what? A woman. If you say that reality is constructed, then you will be in the category of those who say that even though you are born a man, you can change yourself into a woman. So, reality, the nature of reality is at the core of ontology. Okay? Any question on ontology? Okay. So we have 2 types of ontology. We have objectivist ontology and then subjectivist ontology. Ontologists that believe that reality exists, whether we perceive it or not, it exists. They are the objectivist what? Ontology. Those who believe that reality is socially constructed out of our daily interactions and the advancement of society, reality can change and there can be different realities. Then they are what we call the subjectivist ontology. The subjectivist ontologies. So you have to decide where you belong. it is very easy at the level of ontology to say that, no, for you, you are an objectivist. But as we move further, you see that some of you will be moving towards subjectivist thinking. Now, to say that your ontology, so we're talking about, this is what I was talking about, subjectivist ontology and then objectivist ontology. The objectivist ontology believes that social and natural reality exist independently. In other words, it is not your mind that will influence what is real. What is real is real. That this world exists is not subject to interpretation. Okay? If you say this world does not exist, then try to go across. But somebody who has metaphysical powers will say that I cannot see any world because he will just walk through the wall and appear at the other side. So the objectivists will reject that notion that somebody can say that this world doesn't exist. Because if you come to this world, the world will block you. But somebody who is a subjectivist will say that no, even though you are seeing this world, I can't see it. And the world cannot stop me from going or seeing even at the other side. Okay? Because there are forces beyond this world. Okay? So somebody can even see what is outside this world. Okay? It means that then that social construction can change reality. And that's the point of view of the subjectivists. So the subjectivists will say that reality is derived through human cognitive processes. What you can even decide and manipulate what is real. Because why will people be performing juju? Okay, then they'll be creating, let me in quote, objects and items. And in their packet, they will show you that there's nothing inside. And yet when they put their hands and then they bring their hands out, you see something there. Is it real or not? Okay, so that is at the realm of subjective ontology. And that moves also from ontology, you move to what we call epistemology. Because knowing what the nature of reality is, then we have to find a way of understanding reality. So ontology has to do with what constitutes valid knowledge. How do we know? How do we get to know what we know? Okay? So what is the right way of inquiry into an issue? What is knowledge? Okay? What constitutes knowledge? What constitutes valid knowledge is at the heart of epistemology. So whilst ontology is concerned with the nature of reality, epistemology is concerned with knowledge, how to know. Okay, how to know. So where does knowledge come from? What are the sources of knowledge? Okay, that is at the heart of epistemology. Now, ontology then talks about we have had our picture of what reality is about, whether it is objectivist or what, subjectivist. How do we gain access to knowledge in our reality? Okay, how do we gain access to knowledge? In terms of reality, how what exists may be known. Okay, so the inquiry into the deep realms. Okay, what can be known? What criteria must be satisfied in order to be described as knowledge? Okay. So in the same way, epistemology is also divided into two. We have objectivist epistemology and then what? Subjectivist epistemology. So that the objectivist epistemology will believe that in terms of knowledge, we can only pursue knowledge objectively. We can perceive knowledge or pursue knowledge when we allow things to be measured, calculated, investigated within the real and objective realm. So we say that theory neutral observational language, the perceptions of the researcher do not come to play. We allow reality to speak for itself in the research process. So in that case, the researcher is seen as an objective investigator. He himself does not impose his biases, his views on the research, but allows what exists in nature to determine the research outcome. However, the subjectivists completely reject the situation that the researchers' views, those research, their views, their perceptions, their attitudes play no role in the research process. So they argue that knowledge is socially and historically constructed. The interactions between people is what will shape and produce knowledge. So for that matter, we cannot say that we can only get knowledge through objective inquiry. So for that matter, they believe that we must subjectively access the external world. In other words, when we talk about subjectivist epistemology, they believe that what is there to be investigated is impacted by social interactions, is impacted by historicities and other intervening factors, which make it difficult for us to have an objective picture of what the situation is. So knowledge can best be pursued from a subjective lens, hence subjectivist epistemology. So from the onset, I will say that then therefore, your ontology influences your what? Epistemology. And your epistemology will also influence your axiology. Okay? So that then moves us to the realm, another philosophical realm of axiology. This has to do with values, attitudes, perceptions. What role do they play when it comes to research? There are some who believe that research is value neutral. In other words, values do not have any role to play when it comes to research. The researcher is simply an objective being whose role is just to discover what already exists and document it. The researcher is not going to influence the research process, he has no views of his own regarding the subject matter. And for that matter, he is collecting what is known among the participants in an objective manner. While others yet believe that the researcher is also part of the research. In other words, not only is the researcher the lead of the research process, but he himself, his views, his values, his assumptions also have an influence on the research. And for that matter, we cannot separate the researcher from the research. So the researcher is both what? A researcher and a participant in the research process, because we can't take his views from the views of the respondents. So if you are somebody who is a subjectivist when it comes to ontology, epistemology, then in terms of axiology, you will believe that research is value neutral. If you are a subjectivist in ontology, and then in epistemology, when it comes to axiology, you will say that research is value-laden. Research is full of values. Research is influenced by values, perceptions. Okay, so those are the fine lines that you need to take into consideration when you are discussing research philosophies. The philosophical underpinnings, the philosophical assumptions give birth to the philosophical thoughts, or what we call the philosophical schools. Yes. If you are a subjectivist in terms of your ontology, you are also likely to be subjective in your what? Epistemology. And in terms of axiology, you are likely to believe that research is value-laden. Laden, L-A-D-E-N, okay? Value-laden, or is full of values. Okay. Now, in terms of, so I'm saying that when you put all these philosophical assumptions together, it then leads you into what we call research paradigms. So when you hear philosophical paradigms, philosophical lenses, philosophical schools, then we are talking about whether you belong to one or more of the research schools: positivism, constructivism, realism, and pragmatism. Let me say that these are very broad categorizations, because there are other categorizations that you will not see here. So you will, for instance, some of these, they have branches. Okay, they have branches. And so, for instance, you will see that somebody say that in terms of philosophy, I am a feminist. So there's a philosophy that is feminism as a philosophy of research. Okay, so you can have somebody who will say that I'm a critical realist. So it's also a philosophy. Okay, and so on. So we have several philosophies, but for the purpose of teaching, we try to squeeze them into these four categories. So take note, you may read other literature and they will mention philosophies which are not numbered among what we have here. So don't say that those are not philosophies. So philosophy is very broad and the field is still growing. Okay, so take note of that. Now, so when we talk about the various philosophies, historically, the overriding philosophy was positivism, because the study about knowledge about understanding human advancement began with the natural sciences. Okay? People doing experiments, trying to find out what is happening in the world, how the world was created, and all that, how human beings came about, and all that. All those things were within the realm of natural science. So the school of thought that dominated was what we call positivism. Then later on, as the socially oriented disciplines began to take root, then there were dissents. People attacked that positivism is not the right way to go. So we are seeing that we are living in a world of multiple realities. So the relativism of truth. So if that's the case, we cannot inquire into knowledge from a strictly positivist perspective. Then realism also kicks in, and then pragmatism. Okay? In the end, those who don't want to stick their neck out, they say that they are pragmatists. Why? Because pragmatism does not attach itself to any philosophy. It focuses on what works at any point in time. If at a point in time positivism will work for you, you take it and do your work. If at a point in time constructivism will work, you pick that one and then you do your work. So you pick and choose as and when you feel that that is the right way to go into an inquiry. And in the end, a lot of people who are not sure of where they fall, they end up becoming pragmatists. The first school of thought, positivism. I told you that this is where I belong. Okay? Now, for positivists, in terms of ontology, they believe that reality is objective. Okay? This world is there. Whether you believe it or not, it is there. There's nothing you can do about it. It is something that exists, and you can only inquire into it. So, number two, they believe that the right way to pursue knowledge is an objective way. So the pursuit of knowledge is objective. And for that matter, the research process that they follow will make use of empirical methods. In other words, they will develop hypotheses, collect data, and test whether the hypotheses are true or not. But remember, for them, it's either it is true or what? False, not in the middle. It's either black, so positivist is either black or what? White. It's not gray. We don't have gray in the middle. Or it looks like it's white, but it's not that white. Or it looks like it's black, but it's not that black. No. For positivists, you are either black or you are what? White. There's no middle ground. So they make extensive use of quantitative analysis. So they build models. Okay? Say that this is my dependent variable. These are my independent variables. And I want to know to what extent does the independent variable affect the dependent variable. They want to quantify everything. They want to measure quantities. Okay? That's their interest. For them, anything that cannot be measured is not worth going into. If you can't measure it, you can't change it. That's our view. If it cannot be measured, it is of no consequence. Why worry ourselves about what cannot be measured? Okay? So that is the positivist perspective. And most quantitative disciplines of economics, accounting, but a lot of the accountants are beginning to move away from, I don't know why, from core positivism. But for finance, it is still dominated by positivists. Okay, so I realized that when our PhD students were making presentations, all the finance guys, when I asked them about their philosophy, they said that they were positivists. Even though we've taken them through all these philosophies, expecting that some of them will choose other philosophies so that there can be a variation. But no, our efforts are not yielding results. Okay? The other disciplines like HR and even MIS and procurement, some of them are a bit liberal. They are moving towards the other side. So either realism or constructivism or even pragmatism. But economics, finance, they are too rigid. Okay? But the way the world is changing along the line, we will have no choice but to mix a bit, yes. 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 So you don't need to research into God. Yes. So that's not research. You don't need to what? Research into God. You understand that? But if I'm going to conduct research, I conduct research on what? Things that I can measure. Okay? Things that I can measure, things that I can calculate. But added to your question, that there are actually even different types of positivists. So those that are core positivists, you'll find that, for instance, they will say that the world was not created by God. Why? Because they cannot just imagine that someone can just speak words and the world will be created. So they have to find a way of explaining how the world came about. And that's why we have the Big Bang theory. Okay? Because that then associates their mind, their positivist mind, to something that they can relate to. That this is how the world can be created. Apart from that, there's no super being somewhere. Okay, so just to clarify. Okay, so that is a belief. Okay, but when I'm going into an inquiry, I am seeking to measure. Okay, I'm seeking to calculate, provide figures, facts and figures. Because as an economist, my tools are facts and figures that are measurable. Okay, I shouldn't finish my presentation without telling you how much or how big something is. Then I would not have succeeded as a quantitative person. Okay? So what are the key principles of positivism? Live in a real world driven by natural laws and mechanisms. Okay? Believe in the law of demand and supply. The higher the price, the what? Yes, it's a law. Demand and supply. Okay? You can say that, oh, that law does not exist. But it exists and influences your purchases. Okay? So they believe that research is value free. In other words, value will have no role. And that research is context free. Okay? They believe in cause-effect based laws. Okay? So they believe that when you change factor A by this percent, factor B will change by this percent. So it's a cause-effect relationship. Okay? They believe in what we call empirical verifiability. In other words, it is possible for us to verify that when you change something, another thing will also change. Okay? It is also possible for us to falsify a statement. Okay? Falsify a statement. To falsify a statement, falsification is the view that the only inquiry that is valid is the one which gives condition under which it can be proven to be false. In other words, if a research problem cannot tell you the condition under which it can be proven to be false, then it means that it's not a valid research. That's what we call falsification. Falsification. So, for instance, if I say, in their view, if I say that the world will come to an end tomorrow, then that is a valid research. That is falsifiable. Because it provides the condition under which the statement is false. And what is the condition? If after tomorrow we see that the world has not come to an end, then my statement has been falsified. Okay? It has been falsified. Okay? So that approach is what we call falsification. Okay? They believe in mathematical and econometric presence. So everything has to be calculated, mathematics. Okay? You have to calculate everything. The use of the scientific method, rigor. So one term that is used in the quantitative realm is what we call rigor. Okay? We talked about methodological rigor and theoretical rigor last week. So this has dominated finance, economics, and accounting. But of course, there are some branches of finance and economics, we call that behavioral finance, that has emerged, which then now does not believe in the role of mathematics, statistics, and all that in economics. They believe that people's behavioral biases influence their actions. Because, and indeed, that's what happens. That we see that one of the things that we see is what we call herd behavior. There are some situations that traders tend to move in the same direction, like sheep. Sheep, when they are moving together, even when they get to the road, no matter how busy the road is, once one sheep decides to run across, the rest of them what will follow. We call that herd behavior. And human beings also behave that way. Why? Even if they don't know the reason, they will behave that way, which is contrary to economic thought, because economic thought says that the human being is rational. They will, before they take a decision, they sit down and think, and they calculate to see the pros and the cons of the decision before they move to the next step. Why is it that sometimes human beings don't behave that way? So for instance, if you see me here and I just stand here and then I run out very fast, there will be commotion in the class. You will not ask, why am I running? All of you will run out. And even overtake me. That's herd behavior. So those are qualitative aspects of life that we need to examine, which traditional economics will not do. The next school of thought, yes. Yes, Silas. Yes. Yes.
Indicated that they are context-free.
Yes.
But I was thinking that any research that is conducted relates to context.
Yes.
you are also saying that context doesn't affect
Yes, so for instance, yes.
What happens here or applies here might not apply in the next round.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Silas, let me ask you. The law of demand, does it work in this class? Does it work in Ghana? Does it work in US? Does it work in South Africa? So it's context free. No matter what. So the quantitative people, what they try to do is to develop universal laws. So one of the key tenets is that the research must lead to what we call generalization. It must apply to every situation. That's the typical positivist view. But the point of view you are coming from is what we are now moving, the constructivists. They seriously oppose what I said about context free. They say that everything is context determined and context specific. Okay? So that when you are going to look at an issue, you must place it in the right what? Context. Because what works in US, if you bring it to Ghana, it will not work. What works in one community, if you take it to another community, it will not work. Okay? So they believe that you cannot pursue research solely from a purely subjective, objective lens. So we call that interpretivism or constructivism. Reality is socially constructed. So we say that interpretive research is concerned with the meanings that people attach to norms, that they attach to rules, they attach to values that regulate their interactions. Okay? So that the shared beliefs, the shared norms are what will regulate what happens. So the researcher must be aware that there are differences in norms, there are differences in rules, there are differences in attitudes from one context to the other, and the researcher must capture these different situations and scenarios in the research process and not go into the research environment and say that context has no role to play, the culture has no role to play, the values have no role to play. The reality is what it is. So we are just going to come and observe a neutral reality and then take our information. No. So then, here, care is taken not to impose previous understandings. In other words, you are not going to import what you know in the US and bring it to Ghana. Or sometimes we have scholars and politicians doing that. They see that this thing went in the US, it works perfectly. And then they come to Ghana, they want to replicate the same thing, and they get zero results. Why? Because the norms are different. In the US, you can go to work from Monday to Friday in all communities and in all states. In Ghana, there are some communities, Thursdays, you can't go to farm. So you cannot bring the same thing that works in the US and come here without tweaking it and expect it to happen. It will not happen. Okay? So the focus is not only on what they tell us directly about the reasons for their beliefs and actions, but also on the social practices that underlie them. In other words, here, the researcher is aware that, like you were talking about income, you are telling the person to tell you their income, and the income they are quoting, you, the researcher, you know that that income is not correct. So you have to dig deeper So you look around. So you have a nice car that is parked outside. You take note. Then you have what? A flat screen television. The person is using some nice laptop. You take note of all that as a researcher. Then when you are reporting, you see that even though the person quoted this as the income, these are some other important assets that I have seen, which I would use to say that the income has been what? Understated. You understand that? So beyond what people say, there are hidden motives and that there are hidden actions which the researcher seeks to uncover. Okay? So that social practices are viewed to be what give rise to social reason. Okay, social practice will give meaning to social action, and the researcher has to be aware of that. So, what are the tenets of interpretationism? So, believe in a world of intangible multiple realities. Okay, so constructivism believes that reality cannot be touched in some cases. It may not be seen in some cases. It's not tangible. Okay? And that reality is multiple. Okay? You have your truth. I have my truth. They have their truth. The truth is lying somewhere. So we have to look for it. Okay? So we are living, so they believe, unlike the positivists who believe in the world of single reality, the constructivists believe that we are living in a world of what? Multiple realities. The meaning of phenomena is placed in context. Okay, so you don't just go and then you impose what is outside the environment upon them. Place it in that context. The researcher is simultaneously the object and the subject. In other words, the belief is that the researcher cannot take him or herself from the research process. Your values play a role. Then you investigate phenomena alongside ethical, cultural, political, and social issues. And less emphasis is placed on hypothesis testing. Okay? Typical constructivists don't care so much about hypotheses. Okay? And then they believe in qualitative research methodology, unlike the positivists who believe in what? Quantitative research methods. So if your research, your belief is constructivist, then qualitative research approach is what you must use, not quantitative. Okay? Otherwise, there will be a mismatch. Then we have what we call realism. Realism. Now, we have two main types of realists. We have the direct realist and then the critical realist. What realism seeks to say is that reality exists on one hand independently of our human beliefs or knowledge of their existence. Thus, they are the direct realists. So they have two different divisions. There's one group that says that reality exists. In other words, there's an objective reality. Whether our belief system coincides with that or not, that reality exists. So we call them the direct realists. Then we have the critical realists who will say that even though the reality exists, but the reality may be clouded by the extent to which we can perceive. It can be clouded by our social conditioning. Okay? So that what the direct realities will say is that what you see is what you get. Okay? What your eyes can see, That's what exists. But the critical realist will say that there may be problem with your eyes, and the eyes cannot see well, which will bring about what interpretation, differences in interpretation. So then, what you say you have seen and you are interpreting, another person may not be seeing it because they have been conditioned differently in terms of the social construction. So in terms of ontology, two different schools, the direct realist and then what? The critical realist. In terms of epistemology as well, we have the realists who will say that we may not, the direct realist who will say that we may not have insufficient data to correctly define and inquire into knowledge. Okay, so there may be inaccuracies in terms of the data and all that. Then we have the critical realists who will say that in the end, what we see may just be mere sensations. Okay, that is not the real thing, but it's just sensations that we have seen, and that can influence how we inquire into knowledge. In terms of belief, most of them, and which is axiology, they say research is value-laden. Okay, so there may be different worldviews when it comes to research. And they believe that the methods that are chosen then to move and then what? And then piece them together. So we are ending. So the pragmatists will recognize that there is no single philosophy that can competently provide an exhaustive understanding of knowledge, that can provide a comprehensive understanding so far as research is concerned. So for that matter, there is no need to stick to a single view, okay? So what are their beliefs? They are not committed to any philosophical system. They say that apply the method that fit the problem, okay? Not methods that suit philosophy, okay? Then embrace both qualitative and then what? Quantitative methods. So no commitment. So in the end, the whole issue of philosophy is summarized in this table. So when you go, you can study it and get to know the differences. Whether you are a positivist, you are a constructivist, a realist, or a pragmatist. So the assumptions are here, then the philosophies are also at the top. Then you can see the differences. Any question before we close. Yes. When it comes to when you use the term optimization, optimization is actually a positivist terminology. Okay? It's positivists that optimize. Okay? So you are straight in the realm of positivity. Okay? So you can say that the pragmatists are trying to find a middle ground. That's where they, but I would say that it is people who are not bold in their philosophy who become pragmatists. If you are bold and you stand on your views and opinions, there's no reason why you cannot say that I'm a constructivist or I'm a positivist or I'm a realist. Okay? But if after all this you feel that no, none of them is good for me, you can become a pragmatist. Okay? You can become a pragmatist. Yes. That's what, yes, it's possible. There are a number of economists now who are moving more into qualitative research, and finance guys who are moving more into qualitative research. So that happens. Also, the same researcher, so even though I'm a positivist by thinking, it doesn't mean that I don't conduct qualitative research. I do. I do qualitative research. If you come to me and you say that you want me to do qualitative research, I'll do for you. But that's not, I don't believe much in that. Okay, but if that's what you believe in and you want me to do it for you, I'll do for you. Okay. So lastly, I talked about inductive and deductive approaches. So that in the inductive approach, the researcher starts with data collection. Collect the data, determine patterns, and then theories can emerge. In the deductive approach, the researcher starts with a theory or hypothesis, which is often backed with what? Literature review. And based on the theory, the researcher will collect data to test what? The theory. So you can read about the differences between inductive and deductive research. And then again, at the end of this lecture, there are also practice questions as well that you can look at and then know your how far. Okay? If you can answer the questions, then it means that we are good friends. Yes. So what we can rather say is that deductive is undertaken mostly by positivists. Okay, those from the positivist school, most of their research is deductive because they are quantifying, testing hypotheses to determine whether this is true or is not true. Whereas inductive research is undertaken by those that are usually constructivists or critical realists or sometimes pragmatists. So that's how you look at it. Okay? You may be doing a research work where there's no theory. If there's no theory, as a qualitative person, remember I talked about one of the approaches that we looked at in terms of the methodology. I talked about what? Grounded theory. Grounded theory is a qualitative approach that you can use to research on an issue where there is no theory that exists. Because you, the researcher, you are the one who is going to come out with the theory. So you have to get deep into the research process and then systematically generate knowledge so that that knowledge can then produce some new theory. So you will pursue an inductive approach because you have no hypothesis to test in the first place. Because hypotheses are generally based on theory, and there's no theory. How are you going to test hypothesis? So it is the researcher who now has to go and collect data, study the patterns in the data, study the behaviors in the data, and out of that will come out with a theory. Okay, so positivists more likely to use deductive approach. Constructivists or interpretivists more likely to use what? Inductive approach. Okay. So God willing, next week we can move into a new topic. No question from online. Okay. All right. I also thank them. So we'll meet next week. Thank you.